We're reading through the Bible in a year, and today, welcome to the book of Judges. We've been on a fun journey so far through the Bible, reading cover to cover in 2023. We started in 2013 and we end 10 years later in 2023. Now, it is fast paced, isn't it? It's sometimes you feel like you're just kind of hanging on because we're moving through so much material. This doesn't feel too bad today. I don't think these three chapters, some of that stuff in Joshua, man, was like moving fast. So this section today will be actually, it's interesting how much repeated information there is about Joshua and in certain areas. There's some new things. This text introduces us nicely, I think, to what's going on in the book of Judges. And again, what I'm wanting to challenge you to do is a couple things. Number one, understand the big picture of the story of what's going on here in these narratives as we move through them. But within that, or included in there, if we could have something meaningful to say about each book of the Bible that we add to our collection, I think that's going to be significant for us. So I want to continue to challenge you to do that. When someone says Genesis, can you say what it's about? Maybe that's a little bit easier. We can think of some common things, but Leviticus, Numbers, what do these books kind of show us in this big ongoing story? Again, we could hopefully go into more detail also, but on the big picture, we should have some idea of what's going on here, I think, particularly if we've been, Jesus followers, Christians for some length of time. Even if not, it's good to just know the biblical story. It's such an important work, no matter kind of how you feel about it. So I'm curious too, who's joining me. Not getting a lot of feedback or comments, but if you care to, mention to me, can either comment or in-person conversation, or shoot me a message and let me know if you're an occasional participant here or a regular one. It's good to know who's interested here and what I'm doing in this study. So as we jump into the book of Judges, we see the link here very early on in the first verse of this link to Joshua. And again, we saw in Joshua this link from Moses to Joshua not to this time of the Judges. And we saw yesterday at the end of Joshua that Joshua is kind of, he takes over from Moses. When he dies, there's not any one person with longevity now. And when Eleazar dies, his son Phinehas becomes priest, but I don't recall if he's going to show up in Judges or not. So we're in this interesting in-between time here as we move forward in the story from Judges. Samuel will kind of stand in that gap before we get to the kings, to the monarchy that becomes a major part of the biblical story. All this ties together. It's different parts, but one, in a sense, big story that we're kind of learning and tracking with here as we go. So after the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, who of us will go up to fight against the Canaanites? And it starts with Judah. Interesting, the tribe of Judah, from which Jesus comes, is prominent at several times here along the way in the journey. So there's a lot of things that we can track with here. What do I want to talk about? Let's jump down to verse 8. I'm interested in Jerusalem just because it becomes so significant later. It says here that they attacked the city of Jerusalem and took it, but yet we'll see later in today's reading, as we saw in Joshua, that people in Jerusalem remain still there. So again, I'm not going to continue to, I don't think, hit on this too much, but it does come up in here. The taking of the land, not taking of the land, the people are driven out, the people are still here. That does continue to be a significant theme in Judges. So I take that back. I'll keep talking about whatever the Bible keeps talking about. How about that? We'll make that our agreement. So in verse 12, Caleb's back in the game. So chapter 1, verse 12. Again, and Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aska in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sephar. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So when you read this should have rang a bell, because this same description already happened in Joshua. So this is interesting. Makes me kind of wonder, is it just simply repetition because it's important, or is it not necessarily that at one ancient point of time, the author of the book of Judges didn't necessarily assume that the reader would also have the book of Joshua? Perhaps. These are things to think about. Why the repetition? Is it because it couldn't be taken for granted that there was kind of one collection? It wasn't until actually much later that it seems like the Old Testament became its entire collection or canon, as we use the term. Same will be true for the New Testament as well. Things began to circulate, and then they began to gather together, different books, different gospels, different letters, as the collection kind of came together. So some repetition here. All that to say that. Let's look at so verse 19. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plain. So this is an interesting thing. God's with us. They did this, but they weren't able to do this. Why weren't they able to do this? Sometimes it seems like it's like a spiritual reason. Sometimes it's just because they had chariots, and chariots are hard to fight against. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but there's this continual give and take between God with victory, but there's still this not kind of total victory, if you will. It continues to be the kind of give and take there. So I'm still in chapter 1, verse 21. The Benjaminites, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, whenever that day is, again, we've talked about that some, to this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjaminites. So they took Jerusalem, but there's still people. There's different parts of Jerusalem, I think, too, which is an interesting sort of topic. So victory, but then this kind of give and take to the journey. There might be a message there for us too, but I'm not gonna try to formulate it today. What do I want to focus in on? Okay, because there's a lot here. Let me not try to belabor too many little points. Let's look at chapter 2. And chapter 3 is going to have our first couple judges that are on the scene, but chapter 2 will lay some foundation for us that I think is helpful for the book of Judges. What's the book of Judges all about? What's a judge? How does that work? We're gonna start to now kind of have the pattern. And Judges is a very cyclical book. There's a pattern. There's sometimes are twists and differences and exceptions. But there's things that are going to happen consistently throughout the book of Judges, and there's some consistent messages that are going to be given to us that we'll want to pick up on and think about as we walk through the story. So let's go to chapter 2, verse 1. The angel of the Lord went up to Gilgal and Bochim, I don't know how to pronounce that, and said, I brought you out of Egypt. Ooh, I've hit that one a million times, right? How important that is. I brought you out of Egypt and led you into a land I swore to give your ancestors. Whoa, Genesis 12, Abraham, right? Exodus from Egypt, boom, 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 boom. If you've been following me and that's not drilled into your head, then what are you even doing here? I'm just teasing you. But this is big picture. What I really want, guys, I really do want you to understand this big picture, and because so many people don't, is why I'm saying it again and again and again. It's the repetition the things that we repeat are the things that we've heard again and again and again. And so the repetition ad nauseum that you're sick of me hearing me say stuff, hopefully yields the fruit of it becomes second nature to think about these things about the covenant with Abraham and the exodus from Egypt. Okay. And you shall not, verse 2, end of verse 1, I shall never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. There's a lot of military stuff in Judges, but there's a shift we saw already in Joshua between it's less about doing away with the other people and more about the worship of idols, the worship of other gods, the altars, those concerns, and the temptation of God's people to compromise and to bow down, to serve, to worship other gods. That becomes the big issue. It's now less about getting rid of the people, it seems like, and more about don't let them influence you. And then we'll see. We'll see the pattern in a minute, so I won't go there yet. So check this out. Verse 3, chapter 2. And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you. Okay, so there's this temptation thing that's really big there. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called that place Bokim. There they sacrificed to the Lord. Okay, that's good. After 6, after Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to the possession of their land, each of their own inheritance. We already saw that at the end of Joshua, but it's repeated here. Verse 7, more repetition. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110, and they buried. So we already know this. So again, this is repeated material that perhaps the readers here may not have had the book of Joshua as we have it today. Perhaps we don't know for sure, right? But it's repeated material. So after Joshua died, his generation continued to be pretty faithful, but now we'll see things are about to go sideways. And this constant cycle, really the cycle of the Judges is a more intense, maybe microcosm of the big picture of this, both victory and defeat. God's great miraculous, provision and salvation, and then people's turning away or compromising or whining or accusing or whatever, this back and forth kind of pattern. So look at this. This is really, we're getting important here. Not that we weren't before, but this is important. Verse 10, chapter 2. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, that's the term for they died at that time, another generation grew up that knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. This is kind of language reminiscent of something. It's reminiscent for me of the very beginning of the book of Exodus, right? That a Pharaoh kind of rose up that did not know Joseph, right? He did not remember that sort of history. So this is a shift here in the population, and this is a good. I mean, this would be a good place if I wanted to. I'm just going to mention it without preaching on it. That you have to pass the faith on to the next generation. You cannot make assumptions that what you wrestled with, what you saw God do, is necessarily going to shape the next generation if we're not careful. And that's why we had so many reminders in Deuteronomy and other places to teach these things to our children. When your children ask you, tell them this. When they see these stones, tell them this. Tell the story. Tell them about God. Tell them about what God is asking of us in response to him. These are things that we have to do, because if we don't, what happens is verse 10 happens, right? That I just read. A whole generation, that generation died, right? Another generation grew up that knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. This is huge, guys. This is Israel. This is God's people who don't know God. This is a big problem. They don't know him, like who he is, his character, and they don't know his goodness, his provision, his salvation. They don't remember and understand that. And there's only one reason why that can happen is because they didn't teach it. The previous generation didn't effectively teach it to the next generation, and that's a big problem. That can be a sermon in and of itself, or a devotion, or Bible study, or whatever you want to do with it. Verse 11, then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals, or Baal is probably the better pronunciation. These are the gods of the Canaanites. Different kind of variations on this god, Baal or Baal, that was all around them now in this land of Canaan, and the temptation. Now I'm going to kind of wait until really a good passage that kind of talks about some of the specifics to maybe go into some more detail about that. But I want to somewhere along the way spend some time talking about why worship of Baal was a temptation for them. There are some reasons that I think when we understand can make some sense of it, but I'm going to wait until maybe it's a good passage to kind of dive in deeper on that, so that you can just see more of it in the scripture, not just kind of trust what I'm saying. Ideally, we want to see things in scripture, and hopefully what I'm sharing at times is just you're looking at scripture and either seeing it there or questioning it. It's helping you engage with scripture better, not just saying, well, some guy told me, and so that's what it is. That's not the win. We're kind of digging in deeper here. Yeah, Maria, how's that for a contradiction? God's people who don't know God. It's crazy town, right? But that's the deal. That's the deal here. And what does it mean to know God? Does it mean just to know information about God? It means to know God's provision and to follow and trust God. So if you're his people, whether that's in this context or for us now, but we're not knowing who he is and following him, then it's a tragedy. Like, what's the point, right? Kind of thing. So they did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals. I'm in Judges 2:12. If anyone's just joining in here at this time, they forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. Again, Exodus, again and again and again. In the language here, man, wait till we get to the prophets, you guys. This is going to be like R-rated stuff. For the biblical perspective, from God's perspective, to worship other gods is akin to adultery. And that will be in the prophets in graphic terms. Adultery. Forsaking God, forsaking their relationship, their vows with him. And it's important that we kind of realize this, because it wasn't like saying, I no longer believe in Yahweh, now I believe in Baal. Instead, it's this syncretism, because polytheism is kind of a thing. It wasn't necessarily that people in Canaan said, well, Baal is the only God of the universe. They wouldn't necessarily think that. They would think he's our God. He's the God of this nation, of this. So we'll do some more with theism and all that again as we walk along here. So they followed and worshiped the various gods of the people around them. And there's no mistake about how God feels about this in the narrative, right? They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and Ashtoreth. Again, other gods and goddesses. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. So, right in the narrative, we saw a lot like Deuteronomy and Joshua, etc. If you serve God, again, not that you're perfect, but you're faithful. If you're faithful to God, these things happen. If you turn away, if you forsake God, these other things will happen. This will culminate ultimately in the big story here in exile, much later on in our story. And now what we're getting into here is the cycle of the book of Judges. In his anger, verse 14, against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. So this is no surprise. I told you, if you do this, this is how it's going to go. They were in great distress. Okay, verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. So we're going to start to get a picture of who these judges are. They're not judges in the sense of like what we think of today, like a Supreme Court justice, in the courtroom. Although several of them do render, judgments in that way, like Moses did, disputes and that kind of thing. But that's not the primary kind of role here. It's more of a saving, a kind of often military leader. Somebody God raises up sometimes with a prophetic voice, as we'll see in the next reading with Deborah, not today. I think I'm going to preach about that Sunday because it's good stuff. So the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of the raiders. Verse 17, yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves. There's that, adultery language, prostituted themselves. The Bible is going to use these graphic terms. So if you're, this is not necessarily, the Bible is not necessarily family friendly all the way through. It's pretty intense stuff. So fair warning as we're continuing on in our study here. They prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them. They quickly turned away from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was the judge and saved them. So again, here's the idea. Save them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. So now here we have the cycle, okay? And now watch for it as we continue on in the book of Judges. You need to understand the cycle to understand the book of Judges. God's people turn away from faithfulness to him. God allows other nations, other peoples to have their way with Israel or a portion of them because of their unfaithfulness. That goes on for a time. The people cry out to God, God help us, we're being oppressed. Okay, what's that, 3 steps? God raises up a judge to help them. That person does. There's peace. I'm running out of fingers here. And then they fall into the same sin again. Okay, fall into sin. God allows others to come in, have their way with them. They cry out to God. God raises up a judge. The judge is victorious. There's a time of peace. There's a slide back in to unfaithfulness. Again and again and again and again and again is the cycle of the book of Judges. The book of Judges is not an encouraging book on the whole. This is one of the dark times in the history of the people, with some light, with some positive things, because we see God still providing, God still faithful, but ultimately ineffective at really shaping the people in a significant way to be faithful. So this section sets up the pattern that's going to happen throughout the book of Judges that we will see. I don't know if I already read verse 19, but when the judge died, the people were turned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Therefore, the Lord became very angry with Israel and said, because you have violated the covenant I ordained with your ancestors and has not listened to me. I will no longer, verse 21, I will no longer drive out them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I will, verse 22, I will use them to test Israel to see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it as their ancestors did. The Lord had allowed those nations to remain, and he did not drive them out at once by giving them into the hands of Joshua. Right? So there's some, again, to the book of Joshua, there's some substantial effectiveness. They're now in the land, in the promised land. And so Joshua says, God promised, God delivered. But now, guys, ultimately, you can't live in a bubble, right? Like we can't live in a Christian bubble in church world with only Christian friends and not be exposed to others in our neighborhoods, workplaces, families, schools, etc. Like you can't, the win isn't just to not have any temptation or other influence around us. Ultimately, we have to be able to hold fast when there's other things that could draw us away. But we'll see, it doesn't go all that well. So let me see what we want to say here. So let me look at we're in chapter 3 now, verse 5. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hivites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites, all these ites, right? Verse 6. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons and served their gods. This is a fail. This is a big problem. Not because God is prejudiced against any ethnicities, but because of worship, right? If somebody like Rahab, right, a Canaanite, if she wanted to worship the God of Israel, hallelujah, you are welcome. Come on in. But that was the exception, not the rule. Usually when here's a marriage lesson. Don't marry somebody expecting them to change their religion. They're just as likely to change your religion or your values or whatever else. And so that's the why. It's not because these people are intrinsically, they've got different genes or something like this that just aren't good. It's about the way that they worship, which affects the way that they live. And we see that that's what happened in the intermarrying. It further turned people away from faithfulness to God, to Yahweh, to God. So that I think is the core problem here. And again, we see at various times and places other people coming into the people, and that's great. That's fine. But the core has to be where we stand in our worship, not who looks available for a husband or a wife, right? So, all right. First, the first couple judges come up here for us in chapter 3. Othniel is the first one, and we see the pattern that's happening here. Let me just go through it quick just to see what we saw already. Here's the pattern now. In chapter 3, verse 7, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of blah, 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 king of Aram. Okay, so this other guy, not their people, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised them up for a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. So this is Caleb's little brother, who saved them. So again, this is interesting. So we can connect. I'm not going to do a lot of it today, but we can connect judges to Jesus. We can also connect salvation in a bigger, more holistic way than just kind of in a spiritual realm. It's a fully orbed kind of thing that can be used. Salvation. They're under oppression from other people, another nation, and they're going to be saved by a judge. So we see this kind of happening. Verse 10, the Spirit of the Lord came on him so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. He's a military leader, also, as many of them were. The Lord gave this king of Aram into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Verse 12, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, somebody else, power over Israel. Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. This is Jericho, or in and around Jericho. The Israelites were subject to King Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord and gave them a deliverer, Ehud. So we're seeing the pattern. It's just cycling through. It's very evident to sort of discern it. And that's something that, if you want to understand the book of Judges, again, you have to understand the cycle and the pattern that's going on here. Ehud's my man. Why? Southpaw, left-handed. I don't know if we have any left-handers out there in our crew, but a nice piece of trivia is there's a left-handed judge in the book of Judges. Ehud is his name. If you didn't know him before, you know him now. His story has some graphic details. Again, Book of Judges is not rated PG. It's rated R. It's for violence is one of the things, at least so far. So we're told some specific of how he does it. He's left-handed. He kind of hides this dagger that he makes on the opposite side. They don't look for it because they expect people to be right-handed. He comes in, this dude Eglon, the details are too fun here to pass up. He's a very fat man. Do I want to do details? Let me do a couple of details. Let me have a little bit of fun. You can leave if you want to. So he comes in, Your Majesty, I have a secret message from you. The king says to his tenants, okay, leave us. They all left. Again, they probably patted him down, but he didn't have a weapon in the place they would normally have it, so they didn't find it. Ehud approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace. He said, I have a message from God for you. As the king rose for a receipt, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade. So the whole knife sword thing is swallowed up because this guy is so fat. Isn't that fun? And his bowels discharged. Icky, right? So he craps himself as he's dying. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch, shut the doors, locked them, and went out. This continues to be a fun's probably the wrong word, but quite a story. So the servants come, they hear the door locked, and they say he must be relieving himself. And they have to be smelling the crap, right? Because he crapped himself. So they're thinking he's just, he's taking his time. He's on his iPhone, whatever, sitting there on the can. And then later, by the time they get in and discover it, he's gone. So this is again, the cycle with more detail this time. And that day, Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. After Ehud, there's one more judge who doesn't have any details hardly. And then we get to the next reading, which is not for today, which is Deborah. I think I'm going to preach on Sunday on Deborah because I've been just sort of giving snapshots of some of these books, but I don't know if I don't share them, how are we going to learn about these things? And so I hope to just give examples from enough of these books that we can kind of have some idea of what's going on here. Deborah is a cool story, and I think we'll do it. Tomorrow. Maria comment. The cycles are so absurd that if it wasn't awful, it'd be hilarious, right? We take for granted to be able to read the experience. Yeah. So, it's This, again, I think is intended for the audience to not be, they're supposed to see this is not so great. And we'll see us in the story as well, too, that we'll be reminded that there was no king at that time. So we're going to start looking forward to the idea of a king and the potential benefits that a stability of leadership may be able to bring, but will it? We'll see. Stay tuned. See you later. No video tomorrow. Sunday morning, if you want to listen to me then or after or join in the part of the regular worship service, Fairview Bethel. And then, next week I'm on the road. So that's going to be a question mark. I'm out of town for a couple of days next week. So I'll try to let you know there, but you may not see me too much the first few days of next week, but we'll see. All right, guys, have a great weekend. Talk to you later.